request all of you to put your phones on silent mode. Thank you. The second stage talk titled Book Design and Typography in Contemporary Telugu Publishing is being presented by Ragini, Siruguri. Normally, what happens when we get into a bookshop or we are browsing to find an interesting book? What is it that attracts us? It is the cover of a book and its typography. Unless, of course, we know what exactly we are looking for. This session explores the evolution and journey of typography, in which our speaker Ragini will also be sharing with us the challenges faced in book designing typography, more particularly in the Telugu script. Ragini is a book designer and researcher from South India. Her work integrates design, photography, and writing, and is guided by a belief that any form of design is inseparable from the cultural, historical, and political context it is created with. Please welcome Ragini Siruguri.
Can you hear me? Better? Hello everybody, thank you for coming. It's a nice, small, cozy audience, preferable. Before I begin, if you all read Telugu, you will know what is happening on screen. This is not an endorsement for this brand. But if you don't know Telugu, I hope by the end of this talk, you will know what's wrong with what you see on screen. So, my name is Ragini. I'm a designer and researcher. I'm based between Chennai and Hyderabad. For almost 8 years, I work with an independent publishing house called Tara Books. They are known for pushing the boundaries of bookmaking and for their experiments with book design and printing techniques. So when I tell people that I'm a book designer, a common question that I get is if I design the book cover. I do design the book cover, but I also design the inner layout, as you can see. So typically, book design involves bringing together two main elements. You have images such as illustrations, or you might have photographs, and then you have text. Now the key is learning how to balance various aspects of book design. So you might have the aesthetic aspects, you might have practical constraints like how do you design for a particular print process, and you have the economic considerations. So what is your budget to print a certain book? So most of us like to see images. I think they are comfortable. We are able to recognize an image. It communicates a certain meaning. And again, when you see books with, as Sangeeta mentioned, when you see books with nice titles, you're very attracted to them because they are decorative and you know there's some artistic effort that has gone into that cover. But when it comes to large paragraphs of text, which you see in novels, for example, what is designed about that piece of text? It's harder to make out. So this, for example, what is designed in this paragraph? So this technique of styling text, so if you notice, there is an asterisk on the top right, which is in green, which is pointing towards the footnote. So this kind of attention to detail, which allows a reader to look at different parts of text, that is essentially what typography is. So now this includes defining the appearance of text, whether it is printed text or digital text, whether it's on the cover or on the inner pages, and you can do that in different ways. So if you notice here again, the headings are in 3 different colors. There is a different font in the third image. It's a more stylized font. The header in the second image is placed vertically to the side. So these are all decisions, typographic decisions that affect how a piece of text appears. The origins of typography as a field of study, of practice and research are various ones. The very first techniques of printing text moving from the manuscript tradition to print technology happened in the 11th century in China. But there was one particular system, a technology that was invented in Europe in the 15th century that completely revolutionized the field. So this mechanism that you see included something called a punch, the first block of metal. It included a matrix and it included a mold. So this was a way to create metal pieces on which letters would be carved, and you put this into a machine and you're able to print large copies of books. This was invented by the very well-known Johannes Gutenberg, and the printing press that used this mechanism was called the movable type printing press. So here's an example. You see blocks carved with individual letters. And please do notice that this was designed for the Latin script, where you have 26 letters in the alphabet. Once this was arranged into lines of text, you could compose a whole page, and then you apply ink on this page, and you're able to print it. So you can make multiple copies. So compare this with the time it would take to write a manuscript. So 50 copies of manuscript, that's handwritten, versus 50 copies of print, much faster. In 2023, I had the opportunity to study a master's course at the University of Reading in the UK. This was a year-long MA by research at the Department of Typography and Graphic Communication. This is a well-known center for research and practice in typography as well as typeface design, which means creating typefaces for various scripts. And their practice included scripts from all over the world. So at this university, I was exposed to the fascinating evolution of typography. As you can see, the different forms that it has taken, like the big wooden blocks towards the end. And of course, it also researched global typographic practices in the present day. But what was most interesting for me was that they had a whole dedicated section that was dedicated to Indian scripts. So there were all these very highly accomplished academics as well as practitioners who were teaching at the university, and they had huge experience in designing for Indian scripts and working with books in Indian languages. So I saw student work where students designed fonts for Devanagari, that was a very popular choice, Bengali and some Tamil. I did not see Telugu. And there was a lot of theoretical research as well on the historical context in which different scripts have been adapted to print form. So naturally this raised a lot of questions. How do these practical and research projects inform practices in India? Like, do they have a connection in the first place? How many of the high quality typefaces that were produced by researchers and students were actually used in the field? And what is exactly the current status of Telugu, which is my native language, in typographic technology? Of course, the biggest question was, why did I have to go all the way to the UK to learn about these things when I've spent my whole life in India? So I must mention that I was particularly interested in researching book typography, which means things like novels, as compared to children's books, which probably have smaller amounts of text, shorter phrases of text, which may not need this kind of attention. So I should also say that there's already a lot of research being done in other forms of typography. So you have hand-painted type, the beautiful signages that you see across Hyderabad, across India, as well as decorative fonts. Go down to the bookstore, you will see a lot of books with beautiful cover fonts on the cover. So if you also Google Telugu fonts, you have hundreds of very, very beautiful decorative fonts, but these are for display purposes. So having worked in a publishing house and having worked with typesetting in the Latin script, I wanted to explore what happens with the Telugu script in the publishing industry at this detailed level. So my questions moved in that direction. I was wondering, when a person designs a Telugu book, how are they making design decisions? How do they choose typefaces? How do they decide the page size? Was it similar to or different from English books? So if you're new to Telugu, this script is part of the Dravidian family of scripts of South Indian languages. You write and read it from left to right, and it is also non-joining in nature. This is in comparison to a script like Devanagari, which has the top Shirorekha that's holding all the letters together. So, naturally, of course, Telugu shares several characteristics with all other Indian scripts, but it also has certain unique characteristics. Another important thing is that, like all our scripts, we don't have the notion of capital letters. We have, so it is a unicameral alphabet. Telugu is an alpha-syllabic script, so you have vowels, consonants. So the first one is vowel the first letter. The third character you see is the consonant the. Consonants and vowels can combine in different ways, and they have different combinations that they can take. So now in Latin, the way, let's take an example. So if you have to write the word typography, you would combine this set of letters, which has two vowels and the rest of the consonants, and you would arrange these letters in a certain sequence, and it breaks up into syllables. So you have Tai, Pok, Ra, and Fi. Now in Telugu, the manner in which vowels and consonants combine is very different. So if you take the transliteration of the word typography in Telugu, that's how it is written. But let's look at the first character. So here, this is the syllable Tai. Now, for this character to form, the consonant T combines with the vowel I. But instead of this particular character, it is substituted with a secondary vowel sign, which then combines with the consonant that you see in the blue. So you see that the base consonant is also changing form. It's not the same form, unlike in Latin. Now, similarly with, and yes, in typography, this is called a ligature. Similarly with two consonants combining, so this is gra in Telugu. You have the consonant ga, the consonant ra, which changes form, and then you see that little crescent shape that comes under the main letter. Now, again, if you're familiar with other Indian scripts, it is how most other Indian scripts work as well. So, and yes, before I go further, this is a fun jump. You can also have one more level of complexity, which is a consonantal cluster, where 2 or 3 consonants can combine. So the first character that you see to the left is Sya, like in Matsya. So here you have Ta, Sa, and Ya. And Ta becomes the base consonant, and Sa and Ya take their secondary forms. Similar to this, you can have 2 consonants and 1 vowel, as you can see in the character for Pla, like in plastic. So you can see that there are several combinations, and each combination might be different from the constituent form of the particular letter. So because, yes, so now when Indian scripts were being adapted to print form, this technique I mentioned earlier of little metal pieces being carved with letters, that was the same technique being used to adapt Indian scripts to print. So if you had to say typeset a book in English in the Latin script, you had to create 26 letters, so 26 metal pieces. You might need 9, 10 numbers. You might need some punctuation. So it's a nice, neat set of a typeface. But to be able to take into consideration Telugu's vowels, vowel signs, consonants, consonant signs, special signs, numbers, any additional elements you wanted to include, to do this in metal would require at least 1,000 little pieces. So Telugu has Indian scripts together have very unique characteristics, and these require you to create, this requires technology to be created to accommodate these characteristics. But historically, that's not what happened. You had technology designed for Latin being adapted to this. So the other thing that happened was it was the Europeans who started doing this adaptation. It was not the Indians. These people were very skilled with metal work, but they did not have knowledge of linguistics, orthography, or grammar of any Indian languages. So there was a complete dissonance between what was happening. So as you can see here, this is the 20th century, but this is ideally what it would have looked like back in the 15th century as well. So these are two trays showing little pieces of metal. These are 2-inch, so you can imagine they must be that much. Each of them, as you can see in this zoomed in version, is carved, and it's also carved in reverse, because when it is inked and pressed onto the paper, it will reproduce in correct form. So the adaptation of Indian scripts to print began, as I said, happened under the Europeans. It was influenced by type making methods for Latin, and it began sometime around the mid 16th century. This was when the Portuguese arrived on the western coast, and they brought the movable type printing press with them. But interestingly, what happened was, at the same time, there was another printing technology called lithography, which is the precursor of modern day offset printing. And lithography allowed you to just write and then copy and make copies with it. So as you can see in this quote, when the printing press was presented to the Nizam of Hyderabad, he showed no interest in it, because they had these beautiful kitab khanas making amazing illustrated manuscripts, and the printing press was no match for the grandeur of those manuscripts. So at that time, the technique that was used, there was one sort of common technique for all Indian scripts, which is, you can see in this image, where pieces of metal were kind of like the characters. This is the Devanagari script. The characters are divided in different ways so that the vowel signs could be added below, above, next to, on either side. So these were predominantly two methods, but there is evidence of one of the, again, a European type founder doing some sketches for adapting Telugu, but this was not very successful. So in the 19th century is when it gained traction, print technology, and there was a large-scale expansion as the British Empire consolidated in India, in the subcontinent. Printing technology became more and more popular. This newspaper is believed to be the first instance of printed material with Telugu metal types. So you can see that there are 3 scripts. There is Latin, there is Arabic, and there is Telugu in the 3rd column. You can see a zoomed in version there. Another interesting thing that started happening was, because the people making these fonts were not familiar with the script, they were using Western tools to kind of start drawing Indian script letter forms, and Telugu as well. So you can see, if you look at our palm leaf manuscripts, which South Indian scripts were originally written on palm leaf manuscripts, and they were kind of etched onto the palm leaf using a metal stylus, and then they were inked, as you can see in the second image. But do notice the nature of the strokes. In the palm leaf manuscript, you have very monolinear strokes. But the minute you see the printed version, you start seeing heavier and, or rather, high contrast strokes, so they get thicker and thinner. Right? Maybe it's more evident here. So if you use steel pen, which is what you use to write Latin calligraphy, you naturally get these thin and thick strokes. But what happened with South Indian scripts is this is one of the instruments they would have used, a metal stylus, and etch it. Now with etching, you're not going to get thin and thick strokes. But the fonts, as in the last picture, started acquiring these characteristics, and this is a clear influence of Latin technology being used for Indian scripts. So this unfortunately stuck, and as technology expanded, evolved, this characteristic continued to be present through typefaces. So this is a type specimen, which is like a sample book of a type foundry in Madras. It's called Swadeshi Type Foundry, and you can see that their typefaces have extremely contrasted strokes, which is completely opposite what Telugu script naturally has. So you can see other influences as well. Even in body text, you started seeing extreme contrasts. You can see the tops, the vowel signs, especially the second word on the first line. The top has a very thick stroke, and then the bottom, it's basically moving from thick to thin. And yes, these influences are visible even today, because this is a book that I bought a year ago, and the typeface that was used on the top for the author's name has similar construction. So if you see the ku, if you're not familiar with Telugu, the first column is the character for ku, ka with an elongated oo sound. So what you see at the bottom is how we are taught to write ku, but that's how it started appearing. And very funnily, and I forgot to mention this. This is a favorite example of mine. This crescent shape that you see is the secondary sign for the Ra consonant. So if, as I mentioned, gra, the type of gra will have that. So that started shifting shape, shifting position. The shape of that started changing. So it went from a crescent underneath the letter to the left, sometimes to the right. In the fourth image, it became almost like an L-shaped. And the last image is again a contemporary book where they've used the same kind of character. So this shows that the influences of that time have continued today, and people who are designing typefaces are probably inadvertently just carrying forward these influences. Obviously not purposely, but it's become we are all so used to it that we don't question it anymore. So this again, very funny, I saw this in the metro. Nowadays, in all books, you see it on the side, but it was essentially a colonial introduction. Traditionally, you only write it at the bottom. Not either side, it's left. Nowadays, it's either on the left or at the bottom. But most handwritten Telugu I have seen, people write it to the bottom because that's how you learn to write it. But any printed matter, it tends to be on the left. You can also observe when you see signboards of shops, very often the sign will be at the bottom because a painter has drawn it. So the control is in your hand. But the minute you see a printed piece of printed material, it tends to move to the left. It's now accepted, is what I believe. But there are some people like me who are a bit bothered by it. Yes. And in the metro the other day, I saw a very similar, almost L-shaped secondary sign, and yes, so Telugu also had numerals which are not used anymore, but you can see that this type foundry, it's unfortunately undated, but probably 19th century. They advertised that they also include numbers. But the bottom, the image on the right is a book from recent times, and it contains only Arabic numerals. So what began to happen was, especially during the time of just before independence, indigenous local presses that were started by people here, by the Indians, started to want to compete with British produced books or magazines or periodicals. So they began to kind of take on those design sensibilities, which, and you see certain conventions that have come into book design through like since the 19th or 20th centuries. So throughout the 20th century, you had type technology evolving. There was a brief period of, yes, of course, there were machines that made this process easier, that still used metal, but it was mechanized. Then you had a brief period of photo typesetting, where there were drawings of letter forms made, which were projected onto a photographic film, and printing plates were made from this, and then the printing was actually done. Throughout this time, it was British companies that dominated even the press market, even in India. So regional language scripts were all, typefaces were all created in Britain and then brought in here. And then finally, it was in the 1980s that the digital era began, and that was a watershed moment for printing technology in India, because this was when suddenly software became very accessible, computers arrived, digital typefaces started being developed, and again, at this time as well, it was a British company called Linotype, which also produced machines for printing that dominated the Indian market. So when these computers arrived, suddenly people with no prior training had access to design and layout software. So anybody could essentially open a computer, switch on a computer, create a book or a magazine, and they would be doing the work of typographers and typeface designers. This was also a time where desktop publishing software became a whole industry. So you had all these what you call DTP agencies that propped up everywhere, and essentially became highly accessible. So though there have been advancements in type technology, like there is a particular format that allows you to accommodate the features of the Telugu script or other Indian scripts, this has still presented a lot of challenges. And to explain these challenges, I want to show you one example. This example is of an original Telugu book and its English translation published by a publishing house and its imprint. Now, if you notice, both the books contain headers and footers, and of course, Arabic page number, Arabic numeral page numbers. Now, Telugu manuscript would never have had headers and footers, but clearly this is the influence of the Latin convention. The very first page of both these books contains an enlarged letter which is called a drop cap. This is something that is present in Latin manuscripts and books, but historically it is not present in Telugu. And you can see how the T sits so neatly in that little white space. But in the Telugu, even if you can't read it, you know that it has just been increased in size and there's a bit of an awkward space around it. You can also see indents. So indent is when after a paragraph, you move the first line a little bit inside to create a little white space. This again, Telugu manuscripts never even had word spaces. We would just have running lines of text. We did not have punctuation, but that has all been introduced and now you know the reason why. The other thing is, if you count the number of lines of text in the Telugu version, you will find that there are 30 lines, whereas in the English there are 34. Now this is because in Telugu, as you saw, there are all these different secondary signs that can come above, below, to the left, to the right of a character. And to be able to accommodate that and not have them clash with each other, you have to allow for more space between lines of text. But what does this mean? Let's do an experiment. So the left and the right are two paragraphs of the same text translated into Telugu. They are the same font size and they are placed next to each other, so you can see that they are of the same height as well. But the Telugu is very hard to read. This is because consonant signs and vowel signs in two lines are just clashing with each other, and in some cases you may not be able to make out what that particular sign is. If you increase the line spacing for Telugu, it instantly becomes more readable, but it takes up more space on the page. What does this mean? That means that you have to put in more resources, you need more paper, you need a higher page count, your book becomes more costly to produce. And I won't go too much into this, but in publishing in India, costs are quite important. You have to keep them low for books to be accessible to the different kinds of readerships that you have. If you go into more detail into the text, you will start to notice that some secondary signs within these character combinations are incorrectly positioned. So for example, on the left, all these are secondary consonant signs, and in the actual text you start seeing them shift a little bit to the right instead of having them exactly under the character. Again, there's the example of the secondary sign for Ra. Some consonant clusters have structural issues which completely compromise readability. Now, this is, if you see the first, my addition to the right side, in the font Noto Sans, it almost produces a similar kind of structural issue, that the two consonant and vowel signs are clashing underneath the main consonant. But I found only one font which was designed by my supervisor in my university that reproduces this correctly. I'm not sure how many people use this font in publishing today. So these kind of structural issues remain. But yes, it is a problem. But again, I must say that this is not somebody's fault. It is not done on purpose, and it's not a spelling mistake that should have been corrected. It is a very software-specific problem. It needs intervention at a larger level. It's not a publishing house's fault or anything like that. So in typography, Telugu is considered a complex script. So there is a category of scripts called complex scripts, which require a reordering of the character sequences. So in Latin, you want to type a word, you just type in all the letters and they appear on screen. But in Telugu, the computer has to understand that this needs to move, this needs to be replaced, this has to go under, etc. So because of this, the Western world calls Telugu a complex script. But is it really a complex script? I don't think so. But on a very fundamental level, what we're trying to do is force this script to fit into a technology that was not designed for it. So what you need is technology designed for our scripts that accommodates all their unique characteristics. Telugu may have some features that Devanagari might not have. So it needs very script-specific solutions. But due to the current situation, there are a number of issues that remain with software, with typefaces, and this is not just in book design. So if you were there at the beginning of the talk, you will recognize this image. This happened last year. Thankfully, people spoke up. It exploded on Instagram. Basically, for those who are new to Telugu, Flurries, the bakery, opened a new franchise right here in Satwa. And their Telugu board had a completely jumbled set of letters which don't make sense to a Telugu reader. So essentially, if you look at the above example, it just has consonants, but all the vowel marks and any special marks are just randomly placed. It is not a word, it's not readable at all. So people spoke up, this post was taken down, and what you see at the bottom is one way of writing Flurries. So yes, this is a big, this is not a good thing. And also it talks about, I'm sure the design might have happened elsewhere, but what about the people fabricating the board and putting it up? Did they have a say in this? If they did point it out, did nobody listen? So that's something to think about. This is again an installation at my university, which has a world-renowned center for typography. This installation contains greetings, welcome greetings to the town in 131 different scripts. Of all the scripts, Telugu is the only one that was completely jumbled. everything else reproduced correctly, but Telugu did not make sense. This should read Ragini Swagatam, but it does not read at all. Finally, an experiment I've been doing for the last couple of months is with Google Maps. I changed the language to Telugu. I will admit it was very hard because I'm so used to the English, but it brought a lot of very fascinating insights. For example, again, the same issue with the font. The consonant signs, the secondary signs start shifting to the right instead of vertically stacking. So the first word you see here is flyover, the character is fly, and the rounded character for the L consonant needs to come underneath, but it does not. In the second word, it reads textile, but here it's moving in a horizontal way, which again betrays that Google Maps has been developed keeping in mind Latin, which moves like this. It does not accommodate vertical movement. Here again, as I mentioned, the line spacing matters a great deal. You can see a couple of examples where the characters are merging into each other. Why this is important is, if you look at the last example, when I first saw that, I could read it in two ways. I could read it as Shampura or I could read it as Shamsura. Because the secondary signs are so similar to each other, a little overlap and then it can become a different word. So unless the English was alongside, there was no way for me to know whether it was Shampura or Shamsura. So what does this say about the accessibility of an app as popular as Google Maps? So coming back to where I started, I hope you now know what was wrong with this. And I'm happy to say that they fixed it. And I saw that this morning when I arrived. So yes, this presentation probably raises more questions than it answers, which I think is a good thing. And I hope you all will also start thinking along these lines. So this research is at a very early stage, but thank you to HLF for giving me the platform to share it with you all. I hope to reach an apt audience this way. My research draws on the experiences shared by several people, from my supervisors to publishers here, people working at the intersection of typesetting and publishing. If you are a publisher or an editor, type designer, or simply a person who likes to read Telugu, I would love to chat, so please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Ragini. Will it be cheeky to say that her university didn't consult her before writing out the Telugu script? Thank you. This was a very interesting talk. We have few minutes if any one of you would like to ask a question. The mic will reach you.
So, you were talking about how I specifically saw the Ra was slightly differently placed when Metal Type Foundry came into existence. I was wondering if you did any research or have any idea about how it influenced the normal everyday writing, because there was so much type that people were seeing, especially the Ra when we usually write like this, but it was on the left.
So I haven't done any research, but from what I've seen around me and the way people write normally, people tend to just continue the one at the bottom, which is the traditional way. But it would be interesting to find out whether, especially in school, for example, how are children learning to write it. I've been meaning to meet my Telugu teacher, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, that's what I kept thinking, right? Because type was that way for so long, maybe 100 odd years.
Yeah.
But I went to school in the early 2000s and I was taught this full round, not the half.
Yeah,
so I was wondering how that survived in writing, but not, obviously, where did that legacy, how did that continue?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So what happened again, this was all DTP time. People used, the company I mentioned called Linotype, they had done really good typefaces for book typography. So a lot of people just took that typeface, tweaked it, adapted it to digital format.
I just wanted to know what are some of your favorite Telugu typefaces or foundries, just out of curiosity.
I know a lot of them are DTP agencies. I don't think there is, I know there is Typovanam. I'm not sure if the person from Typovanam is here. They've been doing some interesting things, but I have not seen anyone doing fonts particularly for book typography. It's a lot more decorative. One person I spoke to for this research is Purushot Kumar Guttula. He's been in the industry for 30 years. He knows a lot, he's taught other designers as well. But again, in his opinion, book typography, typefaces for book typography were enough in the industry. We didn't need them, and the demand is more for display typography. So there are foundries abroad, as you said, who are doing a lot of typefaces. Again, I see more Tamil, more Devanagari. Telugu, I believe people are a bit scared to approach it because the character set is so huge. Yes, there are a lot of foundries doing it, but whether or not it arrives in India and is used in India is something to explore. I'm not sure that happens.
Thank you, Ragini. This was indeed, yes, she deserves applause. Indeed, a very interesting talk. All of us take back with us some new learnings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.